Well, welcome to this new year, and we're going to start our year with some teaching entitled Invited but Distracted. Invited but Distracted. So I want to begin with a question, and I want to ask you this question. What is consuming you most at the moment? What is consuming you most at the moment? Or another question. Is anything in your life squeezing God out? Is anything in your life squeezing or pushing God out to the sides? Or simply, what is distracting you? What is distracting you? The reality is that all of us have stuff occurring in life which is necessary and often essential, but which can become an excuse which will keep us from experiencing and enjoying the intimacy God invites us into. You know, the problem occurs when this distraction justifies our choices, behaviour and action, when we use it as a legitimate lever to avoid spending time with God. So when Jesus tells a story about enjoying all that God has for us, he uses some everyday excuses that we all know and understand, excuses which we still use today. But then Jesus says, those who choose to live life this way will not get even the smallest taste of the kingdom of God. Now that sounds serious. So we're going to spend the next 3 weeks unpacking a little story that Jesus told so that we can kind of learn and find out what needs doing to do what needs doing without missing out on all of God's goodness. How do you do everything you have to do and not forfeit the goodness, experiencing the goodness of God along the way? So this week we're going to look at how property and ownership can cause us to miss out on the party. To use the Old Testament language, it is your substance, what makes you up. It's what the Hebrews would call all of your very muchness. You know, your property, your portfolio, what kind of, what makes you who you are. So today all that comes under the heading of kind of ownership and property. Next week we will see how work and ministry especially can cause us to miss out on Jesus' invitation to dine with him. Then in our final week we will have a lot of fun as we see how relationships can distract us from our relationship with God. And that includes marriage and parenting, so that'll be an absolute ball. Now, hear me clearly, right at the beginning. Hear me clearly. These are not bad things. In fact, these are essentially good things. They are things, as we will see, which have potential to do good, as long as they don't keep us from God's banqueting table. With all these things, there is always more that we can do. You will never finish trying out new stuff. You will always have to maintain and fix property. People will always need more love. So what is Jesus really saying? He's not saying don't buy, don't work, don't marry. He is saying beware of being invited but distracted. Beware of missing out on the banquet, on the free feast that God provides for you. So earlier in the service we read from Luke 14 verses 15 through to 23. So let me just focus in on one part of that for this week. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." Verse 18. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, "I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me." Although Jesus cites 3 excuses, he says that everyone, they all alike, everyone began to make excuses. In other words, this is a story that applies to all of us. So excuse number 1, I have just bought something. So this first guy who's just bought a field and wants to inspect it represents anyone who owns stuff. He's just bought a field. Now, before you start throwing your arms up, claiming, "But Will, I don't own a field," the field is a metaphor for property. We'll see in a moment, it's got deeper meaning, but think of it for now just as a metaphor for your property, what sits within your boundaries? What do you own? What are you responsible for? It's, whatever is in your portfolio. It is whatever you might put down in your last will and testament. It may be your home. It may be an investment you have made. It could be money in your bank, or even money not in your bank. Your debt is your property. It's your responsibility. You own it. You need to own it. So in this context, the field is anything you own. Now, this man has just bought a field which may not excite you, but for him it was a big deal. Back then, ownership and property was not automatically considered to be a bad thing, because those who owned fields and stuff were commanded to share it. There were rules that applied to you if you owned something. The story of Ruth in the Old Testament explains really clearly how the poor, so widows and orphans, got their meals from the food banks of their day. The landowners were commanded to leave something around to feed those who had no land of their own to harvest. And these Old Testament laws, still in place at the time of Jesus, gave extra missional responsibility to those who owned land and property. And if you read the context of this parable, which we will do much more next week, you will see that Jesus is telling people to feed those who cannot pay them back. So this guy, buying a field, he's about to become part of the solution to the problem of poverty. This man is perhaps even thinking, if I buy this field and cultivate and plant and harvest, I can be one of the good guys. One of the ones who follows the laws of Moses, which says leave leftovers for the poor to feed off. And that's a good thing, right? Of course it is. Of course it's a good thing, until it becomes an excuse. Now, I don't much mind what you're responsible for, or what your property portfolio looks like, or how many poor people you are planning to feed, if you let it become an excuse. If you let it become an excuse to avoid spending time enjoying God, being in His presence, receiving from Him, then you need to know there is a consequence. And the consequence is this: you actually lose out. And as we will see more clearly next week, so does everyone else, especially those you're trying to serve and feed. The context of this whole parable is challenging people to be more missional, to give more of themselves away. And you can only do that if you get with God and if you receive first from Him. Now, you might not be considering buying a field, but we hear similar things in our day, don't we? I mean, especially in faith communities. I hear, if I buy that car, I can lend it to people in need. If we have that house, we can have more people stay over. If we build that or buy that, we can use it for this missional purpose or that missional purpose. You've heard that or thought that, right? You know those thoughts that emerge when you want to justify something. If I buy that new wardrobe, I can donate the old wardrobe contents to the clothes bank. If I buy that, you fill in the blank, I can, whatever. And I'm not being cynical, I'm just being honest, because I've had those thoughts when I want to justify something. I make it missional. It's not a new thought process either, nor is it wrong unless when Jesus invites us to get with Him, it becomes a distraction. Ownership and responsibility is not a problem, but let's be really clear and honest and countercultural. It can be, when it stops us loving God, even when our intent is to love others. Here's the deal. God invites us in to dine with Him, to enjoy His company and the nourishment that comes from being with Him. Now, I appreciate that Jesus was telling this story to Jewish men, and that on one level it specifically applies to them. In that context, we are kind of like those being invited in second, third round, or whatever. I understand that. But we can't duck out of the meaning of the parables because they're most commonly addressing a Jewish audience. Because we all face the same risks now that they did then. We can so easily be invited but distracted. And next week we're going to spend a whole week looking at how work and ministry, serving God, serving others for God, can actually be a distraction from receiving from God. I mean, you get distracted sometimes, don't you? Of course you do. So many times there is an invitation to a banquet or a feast in God's company and you turn it down. You say to yourself, which is the same as saying to the Holy Spirit who dwells in you, I can't do dinner, I'm too busy. I've got too much on. I have to work. I have to work out my new gadget. I have to watch my show. I have to clean my house. I have to fix my car. I have to update my status. And so it goes on. Now, of course, you have things to do. I understand that. God understands that. Because as far as I can work out, none of us have more on our plates than God. So when you're invited to step aside and enjoy God, why do you sometimes treat it like it's just no big deal? This is how big the deal is. Verse 24. For none of those I invited first will get even the smallest taste of what I had prepared for them. You miss out. You miss out on even the smallest taste of what God himself has prepared. And I choose this word really carefully. What God has slaved over for you. So a moment of confession here. I have a device which I now use. You can see me holding this tablet here. And it's great because it saves chopping down trees and it saves print ink, and you can justify it for missional purposes if you want to. I can read entire books on here. I have photo albums on here, music albums, that's right, albums on here. I have access to email and the World Wide Web. It's a work tool, and for that purpose, it is brilliant. It's brilliant. You know, I type out my talk at home on the computer while everyone's out, and I can actually get to the computer. And I type that out most Monday mornings. And then it just magically appears on here, and I can read it and edit it and put new ideas in at any time throughout the week. And it saves time, and it saves paper, and it saves printing. It's brilliant, but it has a dark side. You know, like the apple Eve took, my apple also has life-altering capabilities, and they're not always positive. I have some little sticker-sized things on here called apps. When I press them, they take me into another world. Now, this won't surprise you. There is an eBay app. Others are available. There is an Auto Trader app, although that should be deleted, I think. You know, there's even a Rightmove property app, and I'm not even looking at moving. You know, and you know, these are incredible things. They are incredible. They're like all sorts of doorways, and it's awesome, amazing, and wonderful. But do you think it might ever be a distraction? Do you think it might sometimes be a distraction? I can tell you it is. And it needs dealing with. You know, last year a survey cited that families were once again spending more time sitting down together in the evenings. You know, this news was gratefully received as a change from the normally depressing statistics. Do you know why families are sitting down together more? The same reason they did 50 years ago. To watch a screen. Instead of watching television together now, although the TV will still be on, so don't worry, they're sat there with laptops and Kindles and iPads and smartphones and whatever else provides them with a sense of connection. And here's the thing. What happens when we live like this? Well, you go and try knocking on the door of one of these houses. You know, the invitation for us to spend more time with God, to be fed and nourished and blessed by him, you know, that's there more than we realise. But the problem is so often we're just zoned out. We would accept it if we didn't have this screen to search, this mail to read, or this text to send. You know, something about the first two excuses, the first two guys in this parable Jesus is telling, they've got something in common. One has just bought a field. The other has just bought 5 pair of oxen. I kind of think they should get together and form a contract. I'm sure there's a deal to be done. But do you know what has occurred here for both of them? And in fact, for the third guy, whose excuse we'll think about in 2 weeks' time? This is what has occurred. Their status has changed. When they make the excuse, they are in effect saying, I just need to update my status. I mean, if this was happening here and now in our time, Jesus would be inviting us out for a taste of heaven. That's what the story is about. And we would be there holding up an iPad or a smartphone, taking a picture. Updating our status. I bet we'd be asking Jesus for a selfie. We are consumers, so let me ask again, what is consuming you at the moment? What are you looking at? What would we find in your watch list? What would be found in your wish list or in your basket? What new thing or toy or trinket or experience are you desperate to try out? What is occupying your mind, in any quiet moment? Here's a good question. What would you go and do if I gave you a day and the money and complete autonomy? Where would you go and what would you do? On one level, where you go and what you do is not really the issue. We make it the issue because someone else's lust or passion or pleasure isn't ours and we can easily judge them. If we don't drink, we judge those who do. If we haven't updated our wardrobe this century, we criticise those who seem to be in new clothes every day. Well, I have good news for those of you that haven't updated your wardrobe for a century. You'll be back in fashion soon. It's easy to make comparisons because there is always someone smaller, someone taller. Someone richer, someone poorer. But the issue here isn't how many oxen, or even the fact that this man has oxen, or that the other man has a field. What is the issue here is that getting their new purchase to work is more appealing than dining with God. Fields, and I hope you hear this, fields feed poor people. Oxen cultivate the ground far quicker than we would by hand. New toys don't have to be an excuse to avoid God or miss out on the banquet which is available. In fact, they can become the pathway to improve our connection with God. But you have to choose. You have to not just be intentional, but really deliberate that you will harness this technology for good and for growth. If you have a smartphone or tablet or computer, get hold of an app. I mentioned it a lot. Get hold of an app called YouVersion. Transform the thing which distracts you, your smartphone or your tablet, and get it to serve you. I'm not down on technology. I'm a bit of a dinosaur with it, but I'm not down on technology at all. But we must master it or it will master us. So here's my challenge. This week, okay? This week. Don't just think I'll do that one day. This week. Find something that could pull you away from God and use it to draw you close. Your TV has stations. Your computer can access talks and videos. Your radio can tune in. Your Kindle or phone will hold books. Use these things to feed you, to feast you, to provide a connection with God. Next time we're going to think about how work and ministry can rob us of enjoying God, of experiencing this banquet. But in the meantime, watch how you live. When you're getting consumed with whatever you own, set it down and compare it to the opportunity and the invitation to feast at God's table. I pray that you will get there this week. I pray that you will know God's nourishment and God's goodness in your life. See you next week.